Began on Division Street. Division Street, chillingly appropriate for the kind of neighbor against neighbor violence that was eventually to divide this community of Springfield, Missouri into two camps. It shouldn't have happened. It need not have happened. Everybody says so now. These people are good people. Heart of the Ozarks people. Once approximately 1,200 of them worked at the Royal Typewriter plant out east here on Sunshine Street. Those were sunshine days for Springfield. Most people working. One of the 10 finest plants in the country when it opened. Royal doesn't have a plant in Springfield anymore. Dwayne Cantrell is still around. He plays in the yard by himself sometimes. He used to be a part of the crowd, joining the other boys in a game of touch football.
At the very first of the year, they had football, and I didn't get to play because the doctor wouldn't let me. I would have if the doctor would let me.
But the bullet now lodged deep in his brain, the bullet that can never be removed, has changed his life forever, shutting him off from normal activities that other boys enjoy. How could it happen? A plant closed. 1,200 jobs wiped out. One neighbor shooting another neighbor's child. Division Street, marking the break between friend and friend, worker and fellow worker. Why did it happen? It happened because hundreds of Royal workers, disgusted with the tactics of their union bosses, tried to free themselves from a contract clause requiring them to be union members in order to hold their jobs. They wanted to be free to hold their jobs whether or not they paid money to the union, which they felt was doing them no good. To prevent such freedom, to maintain their stranglehold over Royal workers, the union bosses called a strike in which the only real issue was the union bosses' insistence on compulsory unionism. A strike dragged out to 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. A strike so senseless that more than 600 union members returned to work in spite of the union. And then, in a desperate bid for victory, the union bosses whipped up the fires of hatred.
When God had finished the rattlesnake and the toad and the vampire, he had some awful stuff left over with which he made a scab. Now, no man has a right to scab as long as there's a pool of water deep enough to drown his carcass in or a rope long enough to hang his body with.
At the strike headquarters where union goons were planting the seeds of terror, sacks of nails were openly handed out with which to perpetrate acts of violence. It was from such a union meeting on Division Street, with the union boss's exhortations for hatred and mayhem still ringing in his ears, that a man who had once worked peacefully with Jim Cantrell went out to convince Jim that he should not have returned to work. You know the rest. The legacy of the Springfield gun was a legacy of hurt and despair. Why is it the worker who always gets hurt? Someone here in Springfield asked. After all the jobs at Royal were gone, after Local 469 had packed up and left, after an innocent child was shot. Why? Because the Springfield gun is not an isolated incident. There was a basic evil here, the evil of compulsory unionism. And out of that evil grows a frightening array of other evils, deadly echoes of the Springfield gun. For no matter where a man lives, no matter if he's been a loyal union member for 26 years, no matter if he's served 10 years as president of his union, when the evil of compulsion comes, it's the worker who gets hurt.
Lost my job, and by the way, I also was thrown out of the presidency of that lodge. I walked the street for a year and a half, being age 45 and 46 at that time. You find that it's difficult to find employment. It has been rough. Maybe you would like to have something to say, Ruth, on how do you feel about the issue?
Well, I really meant it when I said rough, because I don't think it can be measured in economic losses. And the fact that he was 45 when it happened to him was one of the major things. And the fact that he is a very proud man and isn't going to say how badly it affected us really was what hit us.
I think that more members don't take a position on compulsory unionism because of the possibility of the economics involved. That is, I mean, a loss of jobs, such as it is meant to me.
It was a time of great mental anguish, and a time we really did have to watch our pennies. That part of it, I think, was secondary. But I think also it was a time when I found out how great my family could be, and well, how strong you could be as a unit if you all just faced up to it. So that, in retrospect, I know we did have a very rough time, but we've come through it all right.
For some, the hurt, the very rough time, is still too close at hand for the worker to be philosophical.
My name is Larry Quintus, and I'm a grape picker at the San Joaquin Valley in Delano, California.
And my name is Mrs. Josephine Gabaldon, and I'm also a grape picker in Delano, California, and I've worked in this area for over 25 years.
The union came into the fields to consult the workers if they wanted a union or not. The workers had said no, they didn't want the union. So the union went to the rancher and told the rancher about it. Then the rancher said that they didn't want a union. Then Cesar Chavez went more than that and said, well, if the rancher and the workers don't decide about it, that they were going to boycott the grapes. So it did. Cesar Chavez did boycott the grapes, and then it hurts the rancher. They signed with the union, and they without letting the workers know about it. Then I want to ask some questions to the union people. So I talked to this girl and I said, do I have to sign this contract? And she said, yes, you have to. If you don't sign this contract today, you will not come back tomorrow.
I didn't think it was right the way they did it. They didn't give us a chance. They didn't tell the people what they were doing. It was just a backdoor contract between the growers and the union.
Also, the union says in the contract that they had that in case any farm worker in the field that talk against the union will be fired, that the ranchers have the right to fire that person.
I have two sons in the service. One is fighting in Vietnam. He's fighting to help liberate a country over there. And still I didn't have no rights over here. So if my sons are able to serve their government, why didn't I get a chance? Why did the people back east believe everything that Mr. Chavez told them?
I'm not making much money as I used to.
Actually, Mr. Chavez, he claimed victory, but us, the farm workers, were claiming disaster.
I'm Carol Applegate, until recently a teacher in the Grand Blanc school system. I say until recently because I was dismissed after a good many years of experience as a teacher in Michigan. I was dismissed by the Grand Blanc school system for my refusal to join or support the Grand Blanc Education Association. I had taught for a good many years and belonged to the education associations in the systems in which I taught. I stopped to have a family and then went back a few years ago when my last child went to school. I immediately joined the Education Association again, considering it to be a professional organization. After a few years in the Grand Blanc system, I began to realize that the organization was no longer a professional organization, but was functioning very much as a labor union. Statements were made which were disruptive of harmony among the teachers and the Board of Education and the administration, some statements which are absolutely inaccurate, and the general tone of the organization I felt was quite unprofessional. Consequently, I exercised what I thought was my right as a free American citizen to withdraw my membership from an organization in which I no longer felt any sympathy. It is a matter of public record now that I am competent, qualified, and a concerned teacher. My ratings are of the highest, and there has been no question at any point about the fact that I am a competent teacher. My dismissal was entirely because I was not able to go along with the tactics of the union. When I refused to support the Education Association and was subsequently dismissed as a teacher, I did this because I felt that I could not in all conscience stand before my classes and say think when I was being denied the right to think myself. The only way we can be sure of a free America is by having students who are taught to think, by teachers who are allowed to think.
In 1959, I chose to run against the presidency of the Union. It was the first opposition for the post in 49 years. I claimed that the election was fraudulent and failed to meet the requirements of the Landon-Griffin Act. My complaint to the Labor Department was substantiated, but the Labor Department failed to order a new election. 3 months later, I was expelled from the union.
I've been forced to go into a position that's outside my normal field at a pay rate that is approximately half of what I have been used to making. And I don't know when I'll be able to even get back into my trade or
whether I'll even be allowed to work in my trade.
If I feel like this, that a man has a right to earn a livelihood, and he has a right to provide for himself and to enjoy all the fruits of his labor. And this is what this union is denying me, is a right to work to earn a livelihood, to provide for myself and to provide for my family.
Do you begin to see how it is? The Springfield gun becomes the Boston gun, the Delano gun, the Grand Blanc gun, the San Diego gun, the Philadelphia gun. Wherever workers have at their head the gun of compulsory unionism. But the threat of losing their jobs is not the only evil for workers trapped by compulsory unions.
This is Dick Rohr, and I'm Gene Cole. Dick and I both work in the aerospace industry, but we belong to the United Auto Workers. So when the auto workers go out on strike, they expect us to donate some money to their strike fund every month. In 1967, the United Auto Workers went on strike against Ford. They had the union leaders had a meeting in Detroit, and they decided that we were going to pay $20 a month toward that fund. But they didn't ask the working man, they didn't ask the rank and file if we would like to donate or if we had any objections.
We've lost our cost of living. 90% of the people have been downgraded on their jobs. The union is able to appoint stewards and committeemen. They don't need the support of the people.
The law contemplates that the fund shall be expended for bargaining purposes, collective bargaining purposes. And as a matter of fact, documented no end. They back political candidates, they back ideologies that were not a part of collective bargaining. But under such a contract with management, you have to contribute and therefore are made to support causes, ideological causes, candidates for political office that you personally oppose.
In the fall of 1970, the Michigan Education Association announced a political action fund of $65,000 that would go to support a particular candidate and to defeat a particular bill.
And yet these plans or these politicians, these laws that they are writing or these positions they are taking could be diametrically opposed, as I say, again, to the member's belief. Yet, through his union dues, this money is being taken away from him to support something that he is strongly against.
Faced with the threat of losing their jobs, forced to pay outrageous assessments, forced to support political causes they are opposed to, contributing unwillingly through their dues to unscrupulous politicians in league with union bosses, workers under compulsory unionism face evils that seem insurmountable. And yet, there is an answer, vouched for by union members themselves.
I believe the ideal situation as far as union affairs are concerned is where you can voluntarily join the union or voluntarily refrain.
If employees have the right to decide for themselves whether or not to join a union, that puts them in control of the union.
I also believe that all unions should be made voluntary membership, because it was this compulsory unionism and this enormous power that this union has really denied us of our livelihood.
Without a right to work statute, a man doesn't have much chance of working where he wants to.
It has been said that the non-union member that benefits from the bargaining of the union is a free rider. He's riding piggyback. But I take issue with the idea that he's a free rider. I rather think under this situation of the agent's shop, he's a captive passenger.
That the union exists for the purpose of serving employees rather than the other way around. I think that is more important than the free rider opinion which has been expressed by those people who support compulsory unionism.
And who is it who supports compulsory unionism? Who else but the union bosses?
Mr. Chavez isn't doing for the people. He's doing for himself.
The union president himself is only interested in protecting the contract and perpetuating his own job.
Meany must have been very anxious indeed to bring about the compulsory union membership idea to the post office, to be willing to surrender the retroactive wage increase. I think this incident shows how important union leaders consider the idea of compelling working people to join the union.
I found that when I joined the organization back in 1946, at that time membership was now compulsory, and we had a good, strong, active, growing organization. We were getting good response from our labor representatives. We had approximately 97% membership at that time on a voluntary basis. They were conscious of the individual rank and file members' problems, and they took care of them. And they saw to it that the figure of 3% didn't go to 5% or 10 or 20 or whatever you might imagine. So it's easy to see that on a voluntary basis, where a member has a right to withdraw from a union, that in the total picture, it is a benefit to the rank and file.
In other words, good unions do not need compulsory unionship, and bad unions do not deserve it.
The answer from union members themselves is to give workers a choice, to give them the right to decide whether a union is worthy of their support, to give them the right to work whether or not they belong to a union. It's the one answer which would have pulled the firing pin on the Springfield gun. As an editorial in the Springfield Leader and Press pointed out too late, there would seem to be little doubt that if Missouri lawmakers had enacted a right-to-work law, the strike at the Royal Typewriter Company plant here and the tragedy which grew out of it last week would never have occurred. The right-to-work principle is the one answer which guarantees workers both their right to organize and their right to say no to corrupt unions without losing their jobs. It's the one answer endorsed with the National Right to Work Committee, a coalition of thousands of employees and people from every walk of life working together to ensure the right to work principle nationwide, supporting and winning legislative battles in Congress for laws ensuring voluntary unionism, helping individuals like George C. challenge the evils of compulsion in the courts, helping others strike out at unscrupulous union officials and the politicians they control. The right to work is the one answer which can keep what happened to the people in this film from happening to you. The situation is not hopeless. Something can and is being done, but help is needed. There's still a long way to go. For the Springfield gun, the gun of compulsory unionism can and may be brought into play again. It can be loaded at any time, wherever compulsory unionism exists, unless you take away the ammunition, unless you act. Don't let the gun be turned on you. Contact the National Right to Work Committee and find out how you can take away the ammunition.
Hello, I'm Sam Steiger, a congressman from the state of Arizona. The film that you've just seen is a real documentary film. The people are real, and the workers that spoke to you are real. Above all, the problem that compulsory unionism presents in the film is a very real problem. And we're going to have to stop kidding ourselves that if we don't solve that very real problem, this really is not a free country at all. We must solve the problem, and we can. Some time ago, a number of other members of Congress joined with me in introducing a national right-to-work bill. The bill is not anti-labor, it is pro-worker. The bill will not interfere with the union's right to organize, nor its right of collective bargaining. The bill merely changes the present federal policy favoring compulsory unionism to one favoring voluntary unionism in all 50 states. How can you help make this bill a reality? You can write your congressman and urge him to support the bill, and this is one time when writing your congressman is not an empty gesture. You can write the president and urge him to place the prestige of his office in supporting the passage of this legislation. You can join the National Right to Work Committee. The time has never been better for positive action instead of a constant defensive action. Poll after poll shows that the American public are overwhelmingly in favor of voluntary unionism. They believe that each worker should be free to decide whether or not he will join a labor organization. It is time to convert this desire and belief into action. It is time now to stand up for freedom.